The stars looked different from this far away from Earth. Daniel Price stood at the observation deck of the UNS Horizon and watched the blue giant sun of the Zarathus system grow larger with each passing hour. He was 52 years old and had spent 30 years working in diplomatic service, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Humanity was about to meet the greatest empire in the known galaxy, and he would be the one to speak for his entire species. Behind him, Katie Sullivan reviewed the diplomatic protocols on her datapad for what must have been the 100th time. She was young, only 28, but sharp as anyone Daniel had ever worked with. Her brown hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her green eyes scanned the information with intense focus. She looked up and caught Daniel watching her. "We're ready for this," she said, though her voice carried a hint of uncertainty that betrayed her words. Daniel smiled and nodded. "We better be, because there's no turning back now." The third member of their core team, Greg Harris, entered the observation deck from the corridor. He was their security officer, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and careful eyes that never stopped scanning his surroundings. Greg had served in the UN Space Command for 15 years before taking this assignment. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen combat and survived it. "Captain says we'll be entering orbit around Zarathus Prime in 6 hours, Greg said. "The Valdren have already sent the coordinates for where we're supposed to dock." "Their security protocols are extensive." Daniel turned from the window and faced his team. "This is what we've been preparing for. The Valdren Empire controls over 2,000 star systems. They've been the dominant power in this region of space for more than 10,000 years. They're going to see us as primitives, as newcomers who barely deserve their attention. Our job is to prove them wrong without insulting them in the process." Katie set down her datapad. "The intelligence reports say that no species has ever refused their terms for contact. Every civilization that's met them has either accepted tributary status or been isolated from galactic trade entirely." "Then we'll be the first to do things differently," Daniel said. "Humanity didn't come this far to bow down to anyone. We'll be respectful, but we won't be servants." The hours passed quickly, and soon the UN's horizon was descending through the atmosphere of Zarathus Prime. The planet was beautiful in a way that took Daniel's breath away. Massive cities stretched across continents, their towers reaching kilometers into the sky. Oceans of deep purple water separated land masses that glowed with the light of billions of structures. This was the heart of an empire that had stood longer than human recorded history. The ship docked at an orbital platform that was larger than any space station humanity had ever built. Valdren officials met them at the airlock. The aliens stood nearly 3 meters tall with sleek bodies covered in scales that shimmered between blue and silver. Their faces were elongated with large eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. They wore robes of deep crimson marked with symbols that Daniel's translator couldn't quite interpret. "Ambassador Price," the lead Valdren said in perfect English, though the translation device on his collar did the actual work. "I am Minister Thalen. The Emperor's Council has agreed to meet with you. This is a great honor for your species." Daniel bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. "Minister Thalen, on behalf of humanity, I thank you for receiving us. We come in hope of building a relationship based on mutual respect and cooperation." Thalen's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested amusement. "Of course. Please follow me. Your security officer may accompany you, but he must leave his weapons aboard your vessel. This is not negotiable." Greg's jaw tightened, but Daniel gave him a small nod. The security officer reluctantly handed over his sidearm to one of the crew members who would remain with the ship. The 3 humans followed the Valdren delegation through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. The ceilings soared overhead and the walls displayed images of Valdren conquests and achievements spanning millennia. They were taken to a vast chamber that must have been the council room. 50 Valdren officials sat in a semicircle on elevated platforms, looking down at the space where Daniel and his team were directed to stand. The setup was clearly meant to establish hierarchy. The humans would speak from below while the Empire's representatives literally looked down on them. Minister Thalen took his place among the council and gestured for Daniel to begin. "You may present your species' petition to this council. We will hear your requests and provide our terms for establishing relations between the Valdren Empire and humanity." Daniel stepped forward and kept his voice steady and clear. "Honored members of the council, humanity comes before you not as petitioners seeking favor but as equals seeking friendship. We have much to learn from your ancient civilization, but we also have much to offer. We propose a relationship based on fair trade, shared knowledge, and respect for each other's sovereignty." A murmur ran through the council. Several of the Valdren leaned toward each other and spoke in voices too low for the translation devices to catch. Minister Thalen raised one hand and silence fell immediately. "Ambassador Price, perhaps you misunderstand the nature of this meeting. When a new species makes contact with the Valdren Empire, there is a standard process. You will agree to tributary status, which means your species will provide resources and labor in exchange for our protection and limited access to our trade networks. You will accept Valdren oversight of your government and military. You will adopt our laws in matters that concern galactic security. These are the terms that every species has accepted. These are the terms we offer humanity." Katie's hand found Daniel's arm and squeezed gently in warning, but he didn't need the reminder to stay calm. He had known this moment would come. Every briefing, every simulation, every preparation had led to this point. "Minister Thalen, members of the council, I must respectfully decline those terms," Daniel said. "Humanity values its independence and sovereignty. We're willing to trade as partners, to share information as colleagues, to work together on common challenges as allies, but we won't accept a subservient role. We won't become tributaries. We won't surrender our right to govern ourselves." The silence that followed was absolute. Every Valdren in the chamber stared at Daniel as if he had just spoken in a language that had no translation. Minister Thalen's scales shifted from blue to a darker shade that might have indicated anger or shock. "No species has ever refused," Thalen said slowly. "You understand that rejection of our terms means isolation. You will have no trade, no protection, no standing in galactic affairs." "We understand," Daniel replied, "and we accept those consequences rather than surrender who we are." The council erupted into heated discussion. Valdren officials argued with each other in their native language, their voices rising and falling in waves. Minister Thalen called for order several times before the chamber finally quieted. His expression had hardened into something cold and dangerous. "This session is concluded," Thalen announced. "We will deliberate on humanity's unprecedented response. You will return to your quarters in the diplomatic sector and await our decision. You are dismissed." Greg moved closer to Daniel and Katie as they were escorted from the chamber by a group of Valdren guards, who now seemed less welcoming and more threatening. The walk back through those grand corridors felt different now. The images of conquered worlds took on a darker meaning. The Empire's achievements suddenly looked more like warnings. They were taken to a section of the station designated for visiting dignitaries. The quarters were luxurious but sterile, clearly designed for show rather than comfort. As soon as the doors closed behind them, Greg swept the rooms for listening devices. He found 7 of them within the first 5 minutes and left them active rather than reveal that he knew they were there. "That went about as well as we expected," Katie said, sinking into a chair that was sized for someone much larger than her. "They really don't understand the concept of saying no." Daniel stood at the window looking out at the planet below. 10,000 years of everyone saying yes, we'll do that. They've forgotten that power isn't the same as authority. They can force compliance, but they can't force respect. "Do you think they'll let us leave peacefully?" Greg asked. It was the question they'd all been avoiding. Daniel turned from the window and looked at his security officer. "Honestly, I don't know. But we did what we came here to do. We told them that humanity won't be pushed around. Whatever happens next, at least we stood our ground." The hours passed slowly. They ate a meal of food that had been provided by the Valdren, though Greg insisted on testing it first for any contaminants. They reviewed their notes and prepared for whatever the council's response might be. As the station's artificial day cycle shifted into night, exhaustion finally caught up with them. Katie retired to her sleeping quarters first. Greg did another sweep of the rooms and then took up a position in the main area where he could watch both the entrance and the window. Daniel tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't quiet. He kept replaying the council meeting, wondering if there had been something different he could have said, some way to make them understand without causing offense. Katie Sullivan's hands shook as she piloted the escape pod away from the Valdren station. Blood covered her uniform and her face was streaked with tears, but she forced herself to focus on the controls. Behind her in the cramped space, Greg Harris held pressure against the wound in his side, where one of the soldiers had shot him during their escape. They had managed to fight their way out and grab Daniel's body before fleeing, but the cost had been severe. "Stay with me, Greg." Katie said without turning around. We're almost to the horizon. I'm not going anywhere, Greg replied through gritted teeth. Just get us home. Daniel deserves a proper burial on Earth. The UNS Horizon's bay doors opened to receive them, and medical teams rushed forward the moment the pod touched down. Greg was pulled onto a stretcher while other crew members carefully removed Daniel's body, with the respect due to a fallen ambassador. Katie stood in the middle of the chaos, feeling numb and disconnected from everything happening around her. Captain Raymond Cole approached her with concern written across his weathered face. He was a career military officer who had commanded the Horizon for 12 years, and he looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few hours. Ms. Sullivan, are you injured? Katie looked down at herself as if seeing the blood for the first time. It's not mine. It's Daniel's. We have to get out of here, Captain. The Valdrin military is coming. We're already preparing for departure, Cole said, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened down there. The official Valdrin channels are claiming it was an accident. That unauthorized extremist attacked the diplomatic quarters. Something hot and fierce flared in Katie's chest, burning away the numbness. That's a lie. Those were Imperial Guard soldiers. I saw their unit markings. They came to kill Daniel because he refused to make humanity kneel. Cole's expression hardened. Get to medical and have yourself checked out. Then I need a full report. Everything you saw, everything you heard. The people back home need to know the truth. The Horizon broke orbit within the hour, jumping to hyperspace before any Valdrin vessels could intercept them. The journey back to Earth would take 3 days, and Katie spent most of that time in the ship's communication center, recording her testimony over and over again. Every detail mattered. Every word Daniel had spoken, every threat the Valdrin had made, every second of that final terrible night. Greg recovered enough to add his own account from his hospital bed. The ship's doctor had patched up his wound and assured him he'd make a full recovery, but Greg looked haunted by what had happened. I was supposed to protect him, he kept saying. That was my job and I failed. Katie sat beside his bed and held his hand. You didn't fail. They came with overwhelming force. If you hadn't fought back, none of us would have made it out. Daniel wouldn't want you blaming yourself. Daniel's dead because I couldn't stop them. Daniel's dead because the Valdrin Empire thinks they can murder anyone who doesn't submit to them. That's not on you, Greg. That's on them. News of Daniel Price's death reached Earth before the Horizon did. Quantum communication meant that Katie's initial distress signal had arrived within hours of the attack. By the time the ship entered the solar system, the entire planet knew what had happened. Flags hung at half-staff. Memorial services were being planned in every major city. The public outcry was unlike anything the government had seen in generations. President Helen Carter stood in the Oval Office and watched the crowds gathering outside the White House gates. She was 61 years old and had spent 4 years leading a unified Earth government through the challenges of first contact with alien species. Nothing in her career had prepared her for this moment. The intercom on her desk buzzed and her secretary informed her that the cabinet was assembled and waiting. The cabinet room was full of grim faces. Secretary of Defense Paul Mitchell had already called up the reserves. Secretary of State Laura Bennett had been on calls with every allied nation for the past 48 hours. Director of Space Command Intelligence Chris Walker had brought classified files that painted a disturbing picture of Valdrin military capabilities. Let's hear it, Helen said as she took her seat at the head of the table. No sugarcoating, no political dancing. What are we dealing with? Admiral Jack Morgan stood and activated the holographic display at the center of the table. Images of Valdrin warships appeared, rotating slowly in 3 dimensions. The Valdrin Empire has the largest military force in this region of space. They have approximately 15,000 capital ships, hundreds of thousands of support vessels, and ground forces numbering in the billions. They control 2,000 star systems and have been the dominant power for over 10,000 years. And what do we have? Helen asked. 42 combat-ready warships, maybe 100 support vessels if we count everything, including outdated patrol craft. Our ground forces total about 12 million across all branches. On paper, we're completely outmatched. Secretary Mitchell leaned forward. On paper doesn't account for technology. Our ships are newer, faster, and equipped with weapon systems the Valdrin have never encountered. We've been preparing for potential conflict since we achieved FTL travel. Every ship we've built has been designed with war in mind. Helen looked around the table at her advisors. So what you're telling me is that we could fight, but we'd likely lose in any extended conflict? Admiral Morgan shook his head. Not if we don't fight their kind of war. The Valdren expect traditional fleet engagements, sieges, territorial conquest. They've been doing the same thing for millennia, but humanity doesn't have to play by their rules. We can hit them where they don't expect it, move faster than they can respond, and make it so costly for them to pursue this that they'll think twice about ever threatening us again. You're talking about a decapitation strike, Laura Bennett said quietly. You want to go after their leadership directly? The Valdren made this personal when they killed our ambassador, Morgan replied. We make it personal right back. We find the people responsible for Daniel's death and we make them answer for it. We show the galaxy that humanity won't be pushed around. Helen stood and walked to the window overlooking the rose garden. Outside, she could see protesters with signs demanding justice for Daniel Price. Some called for war, others for sanctions, but all of them wanted their government to do something. The president turned back to face her cabinet. I want a plan on my desk within 24 hours. Not just a military operation, but a complete strategy. How we hit them, how we protect ourselves from retaliation, how we manage the diplomatic fallout with other species. And I want to know the names of every Valdren soldier who was in that room when Daniel died. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. The UNS Horizon docked at Earth Station 1 3 days after leaving Valdren space. Katie and Greg were met by government officials, intelligence officers, and more reporters than Katie had ever seen in one place. They were escorted through a secure corridor while cameras flashed and questions were shouted from every direction. Katie kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut until they were safely inside a conference room. The debriefing took 12 hours. Katie recounted every detail of the diplomatic mission, the meeting with the Valdren Council, the attack on their quarters, and their desperate escape. Intelligence officers showed her photographs of Valdren military personnel, and she identified 6 of the soldiers who had burst into their rooms. Greg confirmed her identifications and added tactical details about how the attack had been carried out. These aren't random extremists, Chris Walker said as he studied the photographs. These men are part of the Imperial Guard. They answer directly to the Emperor's inner circle. There's no way this attack happened without approval from the highest levels of Valdren leadership. Katie felt a cold satisfaction at having her words confirmed. So what happens now? Walker exchanged glances with the other officials in the room. Now we give the president what she needs to make a decision. You two have done your part. The rest is up to the people in charge. Daniel Price's funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery on a gray morning with clouds threatening rain. Thousands attended in person, while billions more watched the broadcast around the world and on every human colony. Katie stood near the front with Greg beside her, both of them in formal dress uniforms that felt too clean and new compared to the blood-stained clothes they'd worn just days before. President Carter delivered the eulogy. She spoke of Daniel's decades of service, his commitment to peace, his courage in standing up for humanity's principles, even when facing an empire that had crushed countless other species. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red from crying. Daniel Price died doing what he believed was right, Helen said to the assembled mourners. He refused to let humanity be diminished. He refused to accept that we should bow before anyone simply because they were older or stronger. He died defending the idea that all peoples have the right to determine their own destiny, and his death will not be in vain. The words hung in the air like a promise. As Daniel's coffin was lowered into the ground, Katie felt something shift in the crowd around her. The grief was still there, raw and painful, but beneath it was something harder. Anger, determination, the absolute certainty that this could not stand. After the ceremony, Katie was... The war room deep beneath the Pentagon buzzed with activity as Admiral Jack Morgan studied the holographic display of Valdren space. 36 officers surrounded the table, each one representing a different branch of Earth's military forces. They had been working for 72 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the burning need to make the Valdren pay for what they'd done. The conventional approach would be to establish a foothold in the outer systems and work our way inward, said General Patricia Hayes, commander of the Marine Corps. But that would take years and cost millions of lives. The Valdren have had 10,000 years to fortify their territory. Morgan nodded and zoomed the display to focus on a single star system at the heart of Valdren space, which is why we're not going to do it the conventional way. We hit them here at Zarathus Prime. We take out their command structure, eliminate the Emperor, and leave the Empire leaderless. Without central authority, their forces will fragment and we can negotiate from a position of strength. A younger officer named Lieutenant Sam Cooper spoke up from his position near the back. Sir, with all respect, that's insane. Zarathus Prime is the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. They have orbital platforms, planetary shields, and an entire fleet stationed in the system. We'd be flying into a meat grinder. We would be if they knew we were coming, Morgan replied. But they won't. The Valdren think we're primitive. They think we'll either accept their apology and move on, or at most we'll skirmish at the border. They're not expecting us to strike at their heart because no species has ever had the audacity to try it. That's our advantage. Katie Sullivan stood near the edge of the room, taking in every word. She'd been part of the planning sessions for the past week, providing details about Valdren security, their military protocols, and the layout of the station where Daniel had died. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that moment when the soldier raised his weapon. Every time she slept, she heard the sound of the shot that killed her mentor. Commander Ryan Foster entered the room carrying a sealed case. He was a special operations officer with 20 years of experience in the most dangerous missions humanity had ever attempted. His file listed operations on Mars during the colony wars, infiltration of hostile stations in the belt, and a dozen classified missions that even Admiral Morgan didn't have full clearance to read. Ryan set the case on the table and opened it to reveal detailed schematics of the Imperial Palace on Zarathus Prime. We got these from the Kryn Collective, Ryan said. They've been under Valdren rule for 3,000 years and they're more than happy to help us hurt the Empire. These plans show every entrance, every security checkpoint, and every route to the throne room where Emperor Zorvain spends most of his time. General Hayes leaned in to study the schematics. How current is this information? Updated within the last 6 months. The Kryn have people working in the palace as servants and maintenance staff. The Valdren don't even see them anymore. They're invisible, which makes them perfect spies. Admiral Morgan smiled grimly. Then we have everything we need. General Hayes, I want your best people for the ground assault. Commander Foster, you'll lead the infiltration team. Pick whoever you need from any branch of service. Katie, I want you with Foster's team as an advisor. You know the Valdren better than anyone else we have. Katie felt her pulse quicken. She'd expected to remain in a support role, analyzing intelligence and providing briefings. Actually going back to Valdren space, back to the place where Daniel had died, was something else entirely. But she also knew she couldn't refuse. If there was any chance to make things right, to ensure Daniel's death meant something, she had to take it. I'll do whatever you need me to do, Katie said. Over the next 3 weeks, humanity's military machine roared to life with a speed that shocked even those directing it. Shipyards throughout the solar system worked around the clock to outfit the fleet. The UNS Liberty, Admiral Morgan's flagship, received upgraded weapon systems and reinforced armor. Fighter squadrons practiced attack runs until the pilots could execute them in their sleep. Ground forces drilled for urban combat in environments designed to simulate Valdren architecture. Commander Ryan Foster assembled his team in a secure facility outside of Houston. He'd chosen 12 operators from various special forces units, each one bringing unique skills to the mission. Jake Peterson was an explosives expert who could breach any door or wall. Megan Clark was a tech specialist who had once hacked into a Martian defense grid just to prove she could. Ben Murphy was a combat medic who had saved more lives under fire than anyone could count. The others were equally skilled, equally dedicated, and equally ready to do whatever it took to complete the mission. Katie joined them for the first training session and immediately felt out of place. These were warriors who moved with lethal grace and spoke in clipped military terminology. She was a diplomat who had spent her career in conference rooms and negotiation chambers. But Ryan treated her with the same respect he showed his operators. Sullivan knows the enemy, Ryan told his team during their initial briefing. She's been on their station, talked to their officials, and survived an attack by their elite guards. When she speaks, you listen. Her insights might be the difference between success and failure. The training was brutal. Katie learned how to handle weapons, how to move in tactical formations, how to breach and clear rooms. Her body ached from the physical demands and her mind reeled from the amount of information she had to absorb. But she pushed through it all, driven by the memory of Daniel's final moments and the determination to make the Valdren answer for their crime. Meanwhile, the fleet assembled at staging points throughout the outer solar system. 42 warships represented the entire combat strength of humanity's navy. The UNS Liberty led the formation with Admiral Morgan on the bridge. Captain Lisa Andrews commanded the UNS Valiant, a destroyer that had been specifically designed for fast attack missions. Captain Stephen Blake commanded the UNS Defender, a heavy cruiser bristling with railguns and missile batteries. Each ship was crewed by men and women who understood they were about to attempt something unprecedented in galactic history. Intelligence reports began flowing in from unexpected sources. The Talari Confederacy and other species under Valdran dominance provided detailed information about fleet movements and defensive positions. The Kryn Collective sent updates about security changes in the Imperial Palace. Even species that humanity had never directly contacted seemed eager to help, though they did so secretly to avoid Valdran retaliation. It became clear that the Empire's subjects had been waiting for someone, anyone, to stand up to their oppressors. "The entire galaxy is watching us," Admiral Morgan told his senior officers during a final strategy session. "Half of them think we're going to fail spectacularly. The other half is hoping we succeed because they're tired of being under the Valdran boot. We're not just fighting for Daniel Price anymore. We're fighting for every species that's been forced to submit, every civilization that's been made to feel inferior. The pressure is immense, but so is the opportunity." Captain Andrews spoke up from her position at the table. "What's our exit strategy if things go wrong? If the Valdran counterattack with overwhelming force, how do we protect Earth?" "Every defensive station in the solar system has been armed and manned," Morgan replied. "If we fail, they'll buy Earth time to evacuate the most critical personnel and prepare for a siege. But I don't plan on failing. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we get out before they know what happened." On the evening before the fleet's departure, Katie stood in the observation deck of the UNS Liberty and looked out at the assembled warships. They hung in space like silver daggers reflecting the distant light of the sun. In 2 days, those ships would be in Valdran space. In 3 days, the galaxy would know whether humanity's gamble had paid off or whether they'd just provoked a war they couldn't win. Ryan Foster found her there an hour later. He stood beside her in silence for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to come with us on the ground assault. Your job was to provide intelligence, and you've done that. No one would think less of you if you stayed on the ship." Katie shook her head. "Daniel went to face the Valdran knowing it might cost him everything. He didn't back down, and neither will I. I need to be there when we make them answer for what they did." "Good," Ryan said simply. "I was hoping you'd say that. You've got the heart of an operator, Sullivan. When this is over, if you ever want to make the switch from diplomacy to direct action, I'll put in the recommendation myself." The next morning, President Helen Carter addressed the fleet via live broadcast. Her face appeared on every screen throughout the Armada, her expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "You are about to embark on the most dangerous mission in human history. You're going to strike at an empire that has stood for 10,000 years. The odds are against you. The risks are enormous. But you carry with you the hopes of our entire species, and the prayers of billions of people across dozens of worlds who dream of freedom from Valdran oppression." She paused, and her voice grew harder. "Daniel Price died because he refused to let humanity be diminished. He died standing up for our right to chart our own course among the stars." "Yo?" The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zerathis system, like a storm appearing from nowhere. 42 warships dropped into real space simultaneously, their weapons already charging and their shields at maximum power. On the bridge of the UNS Liberty, Admiral Jack Morgan watched the tactical display update with enemy positions and allowed himself a cold smile. The Valdran had no idea what was about to hit them. "Sir, enemy sensors have detected us," the tactical officer reported. "They're transmitting what sounds like confusion on all channels. They're asking for our identification and purpose." "Ignore them," Morgan ordered. "All ships execute attack pattern Delta. Fighter squadrons launch now. Let's show them what happens when you kill one of ours." The Valdran had 3 orbital defense platforms protecting Zerathis Prime, massive structures that had stood guard over the capital world for centuries. Each platform carried enough firepower to destroy a small fleet, and their shields could withstand sustained bombardment for hours. The Valdran military doctrine relied on these platforms as an impregnable first line of defense. But that doctrine had been written for enemies, who fought by the rules the Valdran understood. Captain Lisa Andrews brought the UNS Valiant in on a high-speed attack run that would have seemed suicidal. to any conventional tactician. Her ship was smaller and faster than the Valdran dreadnoughts, and she used that advantage ruthlessly. The Valiant's railguns opened fire at maximum range, sending magnetically accelerated projectiles streaking toward the nearest platform at relativistic speeds. The rounds hit with such force that the platform's shields flickered and failed in sections. "All batteries concentrate fire on that weak point," Lisa commanded. "Give them everything we've got." The Valiant's missile batteries launched in rapid succession, sending dozens of nuclear-tipped warheads into the gap in the platform's defenses. The explosions lit up space like a new sun, and when the light faded, the platform was listing badly with atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. The Valdran crew aboard tried to restore their shields, but a second volley from the Valiant finished what the first had started. The platform broke apart in a cascade of secondary explosions. Meanwhile, Admiral Morgan's main battle group pushed toward the planet itself. The Valdran fleet scrambled to respond, but they moved with the ponderous coordination of a military that hadn't fought a real war in generations. Their ships were powerful, but their tactics were outdated. They formed defensive lines and prepared for the kind of methodical engagement they'd trained for, never imagining that the humans would simply fly around them. Captain Stephen Blake commanded the UNS Defender as it tore through a formation of Valdran cruisers. The heavy warship's armor absorbed hits that would have crippled lighter vessels, while its weapons systematically dismantled everything in its path. Blake's crew worked with mechanical precision, each member knowing their role perfectly. They'd drilled for this moment for months, and now that training paid off in the chaos of real combat. "Target their engines and bridge sections," Blake ordered. "We're not here to capture ships, we're here to remove them from the fight. Make every shot count." The space battle quickly turned into a massacre. The Valdran had numbers, but the humans had speed, training, and weapon systems the Empire had never encountered. Human point defense systems shot down incoming missiles with computer-guided accuracy. Human electronic warfare specialists jammed Valdran communications and targeting systems. Human pilots flew their fighters with reckless courage, darting between capital ships and striking at vulnerable points. On the Liberty's bridge, Admiral Morgan watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The plan was working better than he'd dared hope. "Get me a direct line to the ground assault team. It's time to send them in." Deep in the Liberty's hangar bay, Commander Ryan Foster and his team stood ready beside their stealth shuttle. The small craft was painted matte black and equipped with every countermeasure humanity had developed. Katie Sullivan checked her gear one final time, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She wore combat armor like the rest of the team now and carried a rifle that felt both foreign and strangely natural in her hands. "Remember the plan," Ryan said to his team. "We go in fast, we go in quiet, and we don't stop until we reach the throne room. Jake, you handle any barriers we encounter. Megan, you keep their security systems blind. Everyone else, watch your sectors and trust your training." Questions? Nobody spoke. They'd gone over this operation so many times that each member could execute it in their sleep. Ryan nodded once and gestured toward the shuttle. "Then let's go kill an emperor." The shuttle launched from the Liberty while the space battle raged around it. The pilot, a woman named Sarah Collins, who had earned her reputation flying rescue missions through asteroid fields, threaded the small craft between explosions and weapons fire with breathtaking skill. She brought them down through Zarathus Prime's atmosphere, on a trajectory that the planetary defense systems couldn't track. The stealth technology worked perfectly, and they approached the Imperial Palace without triggering a single alarm. Setting down 2 blocks from the target, Sarah announced, "I'll keep the engines warm. If you're not back in 2 hours, I'm coming in after you." The team deployed into a Valdran city that was just beginning to understand it was under attack. Citizens looked up at the sky where human and Valdran ships fought and died. Sirens wailed in the distance. Some people ran toward shelters while others stood frozen in shock. Ryan led his team through back streets and maintenance corridors, following the route the Kryn spies had provided. They encountered no resistance until they reached the palace grounds. The Imperial Palace was a structure that defied easy description. It rose 3 kilometers into the air with architecture that seemed to grow organically from the planet's surface. Gardens filled with alien plants surrounded the base while guards patrolled the perimeter in formal armor. Jake studied the outer wall for a moment before selecting the perfect spot to place his charges. 30 seconds, he warned. The explosion was precise and controlled. blowing a hole just large enough for the team to enter without bringing down the entire wall. Alarms immediately began screaming, but by then Ryan's team was already inside and moving fast. They encountered the first group of guards in a grand hallway lined with statues of previous emperors. The guards raised their weapons, but Ryan's team was faster. The firefight lasted less than 10 seconds and ended with all 6 guards dead. Katie had fired her rifle on instinct when one of the guards turned toward her, and was surprised by how steady her aim had been. There was no time to think about what she'd done. The team kept moving deeper into the palace. Megan worked her magic on every security terminal they passed, creating false readings that sent guard patrols to the wrong locations and opening doors that should have been sealed. Her fingers flew across holographic interfaces as she fought a digital battle against the palace's automated systems. "They're starting to catch on to what I'm doing," she reported. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they lock down the entire palace. Then we move faster," Ryan said. They fought through 3 more groups of guards, leaving bodies in their wake. These weren't the diplomatic escorts Katie had met before. These were elite Imperial guards, the same unit that had murdered Daniel. She felt no mercy as she fired, no hesitation as she watched them fall. Every guard they encountered might have been in that room, might have been the one who pulled the trigger. Justice was coming, and it wore human faces. The throne room lay at the heart of the palace, up a grand staircase and through doors that were supposed to be impregnable. Jake placed his largest charges against the ornate metal and stepped back. "You might want to cover your ears," he suggested with a grim smile. The explosion was massive, and when the smoke cleared, the doors had been blown completely off their hinges. Ryan led the charge into the throne room with his rifle raised. The space was enormous, easily 100 meters across, with a ceiling that soared overhead. At the far end sat Emperor Zorvain IX on his throne, surrounded by 20 of his personal guard. The Emperor rose to his feet, his scales shifting through colors that probably indicated rage or fear. He was old even by Valdrin standards, having ruled for 60 years, and he'd never expected to face an enemy in his own throne room. His voice boomed through the chamber when he spoke, enhanced by the acoustics designed to make him seem godlike. "How dare you violate this sacred place?" Zorvain declared. "You are primitives who understand nothing of civilization or honor. You will die for this transgression." Ryan raised his rifle and aimed at the Emperor's chest. "Daniel Price sends his regards." The guards attacked and the throne room became a battlefield. Weapons fire cracked through the air as both sides sought cover behind pillars and statues. Ben Murphy took a hit to his shoulder but kept fighting through the pain. Jake threw a grenade that took out 3 guards at once. Megan hacked into the throne room systems and turned the lights off, plunging everything into darkness except for the muzzle flashes of rifles. Katie found herself fighting side by side with a Marine named Tony Garcia, the 2 of them covering each other as they advanced toward the throne. She saw a guard raising his weapon toward Tony and fired. The broadcast went out across the galaxy in seconds. Megan Clark's fingers worked the palace communication systems with expert precision, ensuring that every species under Valdrin control received the signal. The image of Emperor Zorvain lying dead at the foot of his throne appeared on screens from one end of civilized space to the other. Humans had done what no other species had dared attempt in 10,000 years. They had killed the Emperor in his own palace, and the entire galaxy watched it happen in real time. "We need to move now," Ryan Foster said as he surveyed the throne room. "Every Valdrin soldier on this planet knows where we are. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they come down on us with everything they have." Katie Sullivan stood over the Emperor's body and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was justice for Daniel Price, for every human diplomat who had tried to make peace, for every species that had been forced to submit to Valdrin rule. She turned away from the corpse and followed Ryan toward the exit. The team moved quickly through the palace corridors, retracing their path while fighting through scattered groups of guards who seemed more confused than organized. Above the planet, the space battle had reached a critical point. The Valdrin fleet was in complete disarray. Ships that had been moving to intercept the human forces suddenly broke formation and fled toward the outer system. Others simply stopped firing and hung motionless in space as if their crews couldn't decide what to do. Admiral Jack Morgan watched the chaos on his tactical display and realized that cutting off the head had worked even better than planned. "Sir, we're receiving surrender signals from multiple Valdrin vessels," the communications officer reported. "They're asking for terms." Morgan considered for a moment. The mission had been to remove Emperor Zorvain and cripple the command structure. They'd accomplished that goal, but humanity was still vastly outnumbered if the Valdren chose to continue fighting. Accepting surrenders now would save lives on both sides. Tell them to power down their weapons and maintain current positions. Any ship that attempts to flee or rearm will be destroyed without warning. Captain Lisa Andrews brought the UNS Valiant alongside a Valdren dreadnought that had signaled its surrender. The massive ship was 10 times the size of her destroyer, but its weapons were offline and its shields were down. She could destroy it with a single missile salvo, but instead she ordered her crew to stand down and wait. The fight had gone out of the Valdren the moment their emperor fell. Down on the surface, Ryan's team reached the hole they'd blown in the palace wall. Sarah Collins had the stealth shuttle waiting exactly where she'd promised, with engines running hot. The team piled into the small craft and Sarah lifted off before the last person was fully aboard. Valdren aircraft were scrambling from military bases across the capital city, but the stealth systems kept the shuttle invisible to their sensors. "Hold on," Sarah warned as she pushed the shuttle's engines to maximum power. "This is going to be rough." The little craft shot through the atmosphere at speeds that made the hull glow red from friction. Valdren fighters tried to intercept based on visual sightings, but Sarah flew with a skill that bordered on supernatural. She jinked and rolled through their attack patterns, never staying on a predictable course for more than a second. A few shots came close enough that the team could hear them impact the shields, but none penetrated to the hull. They broke through into space, and Sarah made straight for the Liberty. Admiral Morgan had the entire battle group positioned to provide covering fire for the shuttle's approach. 3 Valdren ships that tried to intercept were immediately engaged by human destroyers and forced to withdraw. The shuttle slid into the Liberty's hangar bay and touched down with a thud that spoke to how hard Sarah had been pushing the engines. Ryan was the first out, his rifle still in his hands even though the immediate danger had passed. Katie followed close behind, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The rest of the team emerged looking exhausted but triumphant. They'd gone into the heart of the enemy empire and struck down its ruler. They'd accomplished a mission that would be talked about for generations. Admiral Morgan met them in the hangar bay. The old officer looked at Ryan's team with obvious pride. "Commander, I just watched you kill an emperor on live broadcast." "I'd say that mission accomplished doesn't quite cover it." Ryan allowed himself a tired smile. "Daniel Price has been avenged, sir. The rest is up to you." The Valdren military surrender came within 2 hours of the Emperor's death. Without central authority, the various fleet commanders had no idea how to proceed. Some wanted to continue fighting, but others recognized that humanity had demonstrated both the capability and willingness to strike anywhere at any time. The empire that had ruled for 10,000 years collapsed, not through gradual decline, but through sudden catastrophic failure of its command structure. Admiral Morgan accepted the surrender aboard the Liberty with representatives from a dozen Valdren military units present. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. The Valdren would provide the names and locations of every Imperial Guard member who had participated in Daniel Price's assassination. Those individuals would be extradited to Earth to face trial. The Valdren would withdraw all claims of authority over human space and recognize humanity as a sovereign equal. Any future contact between their species would be conducted through proper diplomatic channels with full respect for international law. The Valdren representatives signed the documents with obvious reluctance, but they signed nonetheless. They had no choice. Their emperor was dead, their fleet was scattered, and the humans had proven they could reach anywhere in Valdren space whenever they chose. The age of absolute Valdren dominance was over, and everyone in the room knew it. Captain Stephen Blake commanded the detachment that went to arrest the Imperial Guards responsible for the ambassador's murder. Katie insisted on being part of that mission, and Admiral Morgan agreed. She wanted to look into the eyes of the men who had killed Daniel and see them brought to justice. The guards were found in a military barracks on Zerathis Prime, and they surrendered without resistance. 6 Valdren soldiers were taken into custody and transported to Earth in maximum security. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was broadcast across human space. Katie testified about what she'd witnessed that night in the diplomatic quarters. Greg Harris, recovered from his wounds, provided tactical analysis of how the attack had been carried out. Valdren military records proved that the guards had been acting on orders from the Emperor's inner circle. The evidence was overwhelming and the verdict was never in doubt. All 6 guards were found guilty of murder and executed by firing squad. The galaxy changed in the months following Emperor Zorvane's death. The Valdran Empire fragmented into dozens of independent states as species that had been subjugated for centuries seized the opportunity to reclaim their freedom. The Kryn Collective declared independence and established its own government. The Talari Confederacy did the same. Within a year, the unified empire had become a patchwork of smaller nations, none powerful enough to threaten others the way the empire once had. Humanity's role in galactic affairs shifted dramatically. Species that had viewed humans as primitive newcomers now treated them with wary respect. Trade agreements were negotiated on equal terms. Diplomatic missions were conducted with proper protocol and genuine mutual regard. The message had been received across the galaxy. Humanity would defend its interest and its people with overwhelming force if necessary. Admiral Jack Morgan retired 6 months after the battle. He'd achieved everything a military officer could hope for, and he was ready to pass the torch to younger leaders. At his retirement ceremony, President Helen Carter presented him with the highest honors Earth could bestow. She spoke of his courage, his tactical brilliance, and his unwavering commitment to protecting humanity's sovereignty. Katie Sullivan transitioned from diplomatic service to military intelligence. Her experience with the Valdran made her invaluable for analyzing other alien species and predicting potential conflicts before they escalated. She trained new diplomats in the realities of galactic politics, teaching them that peace required strength and that respect was earned through demonstrated capability. She never forgot the lessons learned in that Valdran diplomatic quarter, or the price Daniel Price had paid for standing firm on principle. Commander Ryan Foster continued leading special operations missions, but the nature of those missions changed. Instead of striking at enemies, his team now focused on humanitarian operations and peacekeeping. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when pushed to violence. Now they needed to see what humanity could achieve through cooperation and mutual support. Ryan adapted to this new role with the same professionalism he'd shown in combat. Captain Lisa Andrews was promoted to admiral and given command of Earth's expanding fleet. Under her leadership, humanity built new ships and established permanent bases in multiple star systems. The Navy that had once been designed purely for defense now served as both guardian and explorer, protecting human interests while reaching out to discover new civilizations and forge new relationships. A memorial was erected on Earth in Daniel Price's honor. It stood in front of the United Nations headquarters and bore a simple inscription that Cap 2,